Welcome back to the Tarot series. I plan to have a video about each one of the major cards in the tarot. Like each card in the major arcana, I will have a video about all of those. So look out for that. I already have several, but I'm going to cover them all. And last time we talked about the Justice card. And, before I get into my interpretation and my thoughts, I guess, my reflection, before I get into my reflection about the Hanged Man card, our card today, I want to share some ideas that I've had recently about the tarot. And I want to say that it's possible that I will make part 2s or even part 3s about all these cards that I discuss, because there's so much, and I'm trying to kind of like just boil it down to something that makes sense, and that something that might be useful for useful in one way or another to anybody who watches the video. I don't want it to feel removed or too bogged down by abstraction. I know I can get abstract, but I want to always bring it down to something grounded and practical. So basically, I know that I could have gone into more detail and said more about each of the cards that I've made videos about, but that's okay. That's how it goes. So I'm not claiming to be exhaustive whatsoever about my breakdowns of these cards. So I do want to say, though, that I have this interesting new vision, and I'm sure that other people have maybe had a similar way of mapping out the major arcana, and maybe subconsciously some of what I'm about to say is influenced by other things I've read or watched about the tarot, and that's fine, of course. It's cool because we're bringing insight to each other, and I'm affected by what I learn, and it's just this constant feedback loop, right? But the vision I had last night when I was writing in my journal and just freestyle journaling about the major arcana, I realized, well, perhaps the first 7 cards are the first 7 cards kind of represent self-empowerment, I'll say. I don't think that that's the word I used last night, but that's basically what I meant by whatever I did write. And so, forgive me. Yeah, empowering the self. Cool. So, first 7 cards in the majors are empowering the self. And I think I will make a whole video about this 3-part breakdown, but I just wanted to share it briefly here on this video. So, first 7 cards, empowering the self. Second set of 7 out of the 21, you have the Fool to the side kind of, or moving through all of these, the Fool, card 0, and then 21 cards in the majors. So the first 7, empowering the self. The second 7, breaking the self down, breaking down the self. Now that can have the connotation of like breaking down the ego, in the sense of breaking down our limited understanding of ourselves, and breaking down the narratives that we have about ourselves, and kind of trying to really do the work of being honest with ourselves and seeing the truth about ourselves, whatever that might mean for any given individual. And so, first 7, empowering the self. Second 7, breaking down the self. And breaking down the self can also imply breaking the self into parts to understand the whole, kind of looking clearly at one part, one part at a time almost, to gain a better understanding of ourselves. And part 3 is, and I'm still working through this one really, but is reintegrating the self. Now that we've gone through those first 2 processes of empowering the self and then breaking down the self, and now we're reintegrating this new self. Maybe it's kind of like the rebirth part of the tarot, of the major cards. The rebirth section is section 3, and it reminds me of that Donovan song that is basically just riffing off of an old Buddhist text that, the Donovan song gives a very concise way of packaging it, which is, and I might not get all these words right, but like, first there was the mountain, and then there was no mountain, and then there was a mountain again, right? And so if we think about that in the context of these major cards, first section, there's a mountain, there's a self, and you're building that self. And then there is no mountain, you're deconstructing the self. And then part 3, there is a mountain again. So it's the same mountain, but it has been transformed, right? And so, yeah, and I'll talk more about that in future videos. But for now, we're still on the deconstructing the self, leg of the journey. So the Hanged Man here, let me say just some associations with this card. Number 1, there's a letting go and a surrender happening, and he seems pretty chill. He seems pretty peaceful. He's not very worried about what's going on. I read some interpretations of this card that seem darker than my interpretation, and I know I have the tendency to be kind of like, I see things through the lens of light rather than dark a lot of times, but I just don't see a whole lot of darkness going on in this card. I think that there's a surrender and a letting go. There's a willingness to go against the grain and not fit into social expectations, being upside down. There's an illumination aspect. It's like his head is illuminated. So that's awakening, and insight and revelation, like the light bulb moment in the head, right? And, the Hanged Man. So in some ways, I guess that's where the darkness would be, right? The Hanged Man. So there is like this execution quality or martyrdom or something, but it's symbolic, it's metaphorical. So it's kind of perhaps like from the lens of a conventional view of the world. Maybe at this point in the journey, the fool, the human being, the protagonist, has become unafraid to honor their awakening and their new insight and new revelations and their new way of seeing themselves in the world. And some people might think that's weird. Some people might not resonate with that. So, it might be a little bit isolating when, it's a little isolating maybe sometimes when we start seeing in new perspectives, because maybe that might cause some friction or conflict or confrontation with other people. And maybe I think there's a implication of that in this card, perhaps. And so if we're thinking about this section of the majors as breaking the self down, First, the first card in this section was the strength card, and it's like we're seeing the lion inside of us. We're seeing our animal nature. We're seeing our animalness, and we have to make friends with that. We have to tame we got to tame our animalness in the sense that we have to tame the monkey mind, the out of control, lost in thought mind. We have to transmute negative emotions like anger or jealousy or hatred. We got to use the strong energy of those emotions and transmute it into something that doesn't cause so much suffering and that actually makes our lives better. And then the hermit, is determined to go down into the darkness and look at all the things that haven't been looked at. And that's a way of deconstructing the self, because we're, cultivating honesty and fearlessness to look at things about ourselves and about things beyond us. Just seeing the whole picture, the good, the bad, the ugly, the blissful, the suffering and everything, and seeing the whole interconnected web, which is represented in the Wheel of Fortune. And the Wheel of Fortune, in the context of breaking the self down, it's dissolving the self into the whole. It's like our individuality is only, it's in the context of the wheel, the whole universe. And so we're no longer a separate self by the time it gets to the Wheel of Fortune. And then the Justice card, now that we're no longer a separate self, we what are we going to do with that? How does that affect our action in the world? And I link compassion to the Justice card. And so compassion arises at that point in the journey, in the Justice card, by honoring everything and everybody as connected to you. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Treat your neighbor as yourself. And then the Hanged Man here, he, the previous conception that he had of himself has been turned upside down. And so he has had a paradigm shift. In some ways I see this card as representing a paradigm shift, a life-altering puncture in the previous belief system or ideas or views, worldview and self-conception has been turned upside down, and he's okay with that, and he's suspended, and he is, there's a certain level of stillness and peace in this card, I would say. And let me see if I left anything out. So, yep. I guess the only other thing that I didn't explicitly mention is that this letting go and letting go and this loosening of a clinging attachment to all the things that may have made us comforted in the past in terms of like our belief system or worldviews. And by letting go, even though that's scary and it often causes discomfort, it can also be extremely nourishing, because we're kind of embracing the Tao, or the natural flow, the natural grace, the natural intelligence of things. And obviously that's not to say that we need to just do nothing and just be completely robotic or zombies. but it's still acting in the world and still living our everyday lives and engaging with our everyday lives, but doing it from a looser and more playful. There's a playfulness in this card. A looser and more playful base. And yeah, I think that's where I'm going to stop today about the Hanged Man.